Hi, this is Reed Jacobs, social worker and bereavement services coordinator at Faith and Hope Hospice in Pasadena, California. During the time of COVID, life is changing rapidly, and that's especially true for people near end of life and people who are grieving. So, over the next few weeks, we're going to bring some conversations and interviews that will hopefully help you survive this time and give you some ideas for ways to cope and to engage with your family. Today we're meeting with Brianna Garrison in Houston, Texas. Welcome, Brianna. Please tell us a little bit about yourself and the work you do.
Yeah, so I am a licensed clinical social worker in the state of Texas, and I've been practicing social work for the last decade, primarily working with older adults in oncology, and then the last 5 or 6 years working with older adults in Alzheimer's disease and dementia. I have been a practicing clinical social worker. Right now, I work in the educational realm, training incoming social workers, and then also doing clinical supervision for social workers and some counseling for caregivers and persons newly diagnosed with dementia. And I also do research in aging and particularly in regard to social connection and social isolation.
Nice. Sounds like you are the perfect person for this interview.
Thank you.
So, how have you seen COVID impacting your community?
Yeah, I think one of the things that has been so prevalent, probably two things. I think the language used around this, the coronavirus and the response to it, has really highlighted the ageism in our culture, and how often older adults are not seen as valued or as highly valued in society. And I think that's been really discouraging for a lot of individuals. But the other thing that I've seen is just because of social distancing and physical distancing protocols, so many individuals who are already kind of socially marginalized have been completely socially isolated in order to be safe. But also, it really, that's really hard to be isolated and kind of put away from the few connections that you did have with people in the world.
Yeah, it's the intent of social distancing to keep someone physically healthy. It's causing its own impacts on mental health.
Yes, for sure.
Yeah. What changes have you seen put in place for skilled nursing or assisted living facilities?
A lot of facilities have had to enact physical distancing protocols from outside visitors, but also inside the facility. So many facilities that had a lot of social calendars, bingo and mahjong, things like that, and they can't have those type of activities inside the facility in order to reduce any spread that could occur. And so we're seeing older adults that typically already had limited social connection to a few outside contacts or just individuals inside, even more isolated because they can't leave their rooms in the same way that they could before, and they can't connect with family members. And then there's this additional component of trying to utilize technology with population that hasn't readily independently used technology, and having limited staff members available to help with that one-on-one technology assistance.
Yeah, I know a lot of us have been relying on video conferencing uh, to do our work, and then recommendations have been for families and their loved ones who are in facilities to just use FaceTime or Zoom or other video conferencing, but that isn't a good option for a lot of people. Can you explain a little bit why that's not a good option?
Yeah, I mean, part of that is just right, like even in my own use of technology over the last couple of months, technology can be finicky, or it requires a lot of troubleshooting and problem solving. Um, that goes along with my familiarity, right, with the technology.
Hmm.
But often, if older adults, and especially older adults that haven't used it, or are experiencing any cognitive decline, there isn't a learning platform to build any kind of scaffolding for technology. There's not muscle memory for it, there's not a familiarity for it, and so it can be frustrating to figure out how to use it and use it appropriately, or troubleshoot when it isn't working appropriately. Um, so it works beautifully if there's, someone there that's technologically capable and can assist the individual. But with a lot of protocols, there's limited contact from staff, and trying to maintain distance from individuals that are living in facilities to reduce any exposure, because they're not just living in the facility. The workers aren't, they're going to grocery stores and going home to their families and things like that. So there's always a potential risk. And so trying to mitigate those risks includes not being available to help with some of the things that could keep them connected to the outside world.
Yeah, I know. I consider myself pretty tech savvy, um, but before coming on this call with you, I had to YouTube how to record this call on the Zoom platform. So I feel like even if I can't figure it out on my own, it must be so much harder for people who aren't so tech savvy.
Yeah. And I mean, you think like we've had years and decades of using this technology as part of our regular life, but even now I feel like the technology is that an advanced place that it's unfamiliar to me. And then we look at older adults who often don't always have cell phones because of the new capabilities, particularly those that might have memory loss, haven't been able to get familiar with the technology. But technology requires
Mhm.
updates and all kinds of bug fixes. I know Zoom has had several of those come out, and unless you're familiar with it and can set up to get everything up to speed, you know, to make it work
Mm.
perfectly, then you run into
Yeah,
trouble, right?
yeah. And um, and like you had been mentioning, this often the staff are called on to help the residents with navigating the technology, but um, their availability is limited. And I know even in best of times, just trying to get everyone toileted after lunch is a big challenge. And so I can only imagine how much more that is for if they're trying to facilitate video calls.
Yeah, and I mean, even the number of staff that are in the building is reduced because of shift, working shifts and trying to follow safety protocols. But you think about the important role that the family typically plays in these facilities, that does reduce the burden of workload on some of the care facility staff. And now all of that additional support has been eliminated. There's a lot more work to be done during the day as well.
I hadn't thought about that with reduced work staff.
Yeah, and additional sanitary protocols,
Mm,
right?
yeah, yeah.
Yeah, it's hard.
With the social distancing and people not being able to come into facilities, and particularly family members, um, what can a family member still do to engage with their loved one?
Yeah, I think if family members do have a way to have those connections, phone calls and things like that, I think that's really helpful. Sending messages, if facility staff had like a main email address that they could have video messages or voice messages sent from family, then they can still share kind of those
Mm-hmm.
voice connections in that way. One of the other things that I've seen some family members do is get back into that, old pen
Mm.
pal mode and send, handwritten letters and notes. But following whatever protocols, that their city and their facility has in place, being creative with the ways that you have connection, whether it's, making a poster board big enough for them to read outside of the window, but finding ways to have meaningful connection. I know a lot of facilities right now aren't accepting outside um, visitors or even like delivery. So, there are some things that you're not able to do, but I think finding out from your facility what could be possible and offering, to participate in some of those, whether it's sending, voice messages or, those video messages, anything that you can do to continue to connect with your loved one.
And I hadn't thought about deliveries being restricted, um, in trying to come up with ways for people to still engage. I was thinking, um, like making a favorite meal, or if someone has a really good chocolate chip cookie recipe that they always make for their loved one. Um, do you do you think they would be able to say make those cookies and bring them to the facility, and the staff take them to the resident, or are they even restricting that sort of thing?
So it will probably depend on the agency. So I think all of those things are worthy ideas to engage in. The first thing that I would suggest is just talking with the facility to make sure you understand what protocols they're following. I know some facilities here are allowing like drop off packages, care packages like that. But some of them here are not accepting anything from the outside. Um, and then they have strict kind of sanitation measures for even, food delivery that they're getting for their kitchen. So I think it might be important to think about what creative things would you like to do, and then talking with the executive director or the on-site manager to see what protocols are in place that you can follow. And what I'm hearing from residential staff is that they're happy to think with families about that. If the families want to contact them and have those conversations, they're not opposed to making sure that their loved one feels connected to their family and loved and valued and treasured, um, as long as they can continue to enforce the rules that they need to, regulated by their city or state.
Mm, okay. Yeah, because it sounds like the important thing is just that open communication, so that if you do bring something, one, if they'll accept it, or if there's any restrictions or um, cleanliness standards that they have in place, that you're following those so that they will actually accept um,
Yeah.
something you bring.
Yes, for sure. And I think, the facility staff, they're there doing um, the work that they're doing because they do care about the population and the residents. And so I know that they may even see individual needs from their inside perspective that they could speak to on things that might be beneficial or helpful for your loved one to feel loved and connected to you.
In a previous conversation, you had been telling me about some of the creative responses people had that included visits through open windows.
Mhm.
Can you tell us more about um, how people are engaging through a window?
Yeah, gosh, I've seen just so many creative things come. I'm so impressed with how out of the box families and these facilities have been during this pandemic response. But one of the facilities that I work with, they had mini horses, an organization, come by the window and visit, so that the older adults in the facility could see the mini horses, and they had them parade across the windows. I thought that was
Mhm.
really, just really cute. And Who
That's
doesn't
great.
want to see a mini horse? They're so cute.
Right?
Um, I've seen some family members that did like a drive-by caravan party, and it was the lady's, I think, 90th birthday, and each family car dressed like decorated their car like a decade from the last 90 years. Um, and so just really creative, ways to connect with your loved ones and still celebrate those big moments. Um, yeah, I think, as long as the facility can work with you, there are some out of the box ways to still connect with loved ones and have those just really cherished, memorable experiences with those that are in these facilities and particularly isolated during this time of physical distancing.
Yeah, because it's so important to still have celebrations and to recognize
Yeah.
milestones. And the important thing is that you have those in some way. The way you do it is less important. It's the meaning behind it.
Yes.
Um, yeah.
Yeah, and I think, one of the things that we kind of get stuck on sometimes is that we celebrate in certain ways, right? We've got traditions and rituals, but all of that right now has kind of been tossed out of the water. And one of the really beautiful things that I think we can try to enact and emulate from this time is how can we think about this population who is at risk but shouldn't be um, forgotten about, and those moments need to be celebrated now more than ever. What are the creative things that we can do to really express our connection and caring? And there are some really creative things happening, um, you know, that we can learn from and think about, what are some of these things we should continue in the future?
Yeah, because from this might come new ways to approach life or interact with others that we wouldn't have come up with before. And after all this has passed, maybe it's something that we can continue with and make part of our normal every day. So, kind of thinking on that end, what do you think some long-term effects of COVID and these restrictions might be?
You know, um, some of the long-term effects that I'm concerned about are just this heightened isolation. There's already a lot of information research out there that isolation can be really harmful to mental health, but particularly for older adults, it can rapidly decline cognition. It can increase comorbidities. It can exacerbate depressive symptoms. And so there are some long-term health and mental health concerns that I have if we're not really mitigating the social isolation component of physical distancing. I think the other aspect is we're seeing this pervasive ageism. And if we don't address it and recognize that our older adults bring much to our society and give a lot of value and meaning to our society and substantiate the foundation of our society, then we really lose ultimately. And so I think fighting against the ageism and really showing how important our older adults are to our society is important all the time, but now more than ever when so much language is being tossed about in regard to who's vulnerable and what we should be doing to protect the vulnerable.
Hmm. Yeah, that is important. Has significant impacts like you're just describing. And right now it sounds like that's just ramping up even more. So I know we've talked about quite a few things, and we discussed some of the creative ways people have been helping or still engaging. Do you
Yes.
have any resources that you could share?
Yeah, there are some great guides on physical distancing protocol, actually, that the Gerontological Society of America and the CDC put together on physical distancing but still socially connected. There's also some great communication guides from the Alzheimer's Association for connecting during physical distancing. I think both of those things are really important to think about. Let's maintain safety, physical safety of the ones that we love, but let's do everything we can to also care for the emotional and cognitive
Mm,
well-being of
yeah.
the ones that we love. Right, so we've got these dual hands that we need to balance as much as we can, and both are important for us to pay attention to.
Okay. Well, I think, is there anything that we haven't gone over or any thoughts that you'd like to share in closing?
I just want to reiterate is that your presence really matters. So, however creative we have to be for presence to be felt, even if it's not physically present, is really important. And I want, especially those that are caring for those who may be ill or in facilities long term, to know that the presence that you've had makes an impact, and the efforts that you're making for connection are meaningful, and that there are still meaningful ways to engage even when you can't be physically present. And so just encouraging as much as you can to have conversations with the facility or try to work with a professional to think through what that might mean for you and your loved one.
All great ideas. Well, Brianna, I certainly appreciate your time and the expertise and insights that you were able to share with us.
Thank you for having me, and thank you for caring about this. It's really important.
Well, I hope you enjoyed that conversation with Brianna as much as I did. She provided some great information on how we can still be present and have meaningful engagements with those we love during the time of COVID. Be sure to check out the Faith and Hope Hospice blog at faithandhopehospice.com/blog. We'll also post some resources that Brianna shared on the website as well. Thank you so much for listening. Stay safe and be well.